Hey guys, welcome back to Builds by Maz. Today I'll be showing you how I built this modern bookshelf made from metal and wood. The entire frame is one piece that's been welded together, and each shelf is removable that's held in place with strong magnets. Follow along and I'll show you how you can make your own. Let's get started. I started off with a bunch of 2x8s from Home Depot. But with most lumber from these big box stores, they're not exactly all the same size, as you can see here. The first step was to rip off a small edge off each piece. You can see how little wood I took off here, but it's just enough to give me a nice square edge, rather than the factory rounded corner which you can see here. Then I set my table saw to 7 inches exactly, and ripped off the other end of the boards. This gave me 2 squared edges, and also ensured that each board was exactly the same width as the others. I then prepared these boards for a glue up, cleaning off the edges, and then using a strong wood glue on the edges of both pieces that would be joined together, spreading it out to ensure that there would be a strong bond. I clamped them together and let them sit overnight, and this would give me 14-inch wide shelves. I tested out a bunch of different stain colors that I already had in my garage, just to see if I would like any of them. It's always a good idea to test out the stain color beforehand on the same type of wood that you're going to be using for your project, so you can get an accurate test color. While that was drying, I went ahead and cut down all my boards into individual shelves. The great thing about this bookshelf design is you can adjust the shelves to be as wide or narrow as you want, depending on your own space. A lot of these boards have different thicknesses, and you can see where they join in the middle here, there's a little lip. If you have a full benchtop planer, you can fix this issue in just a couple of minutes. But if you don't have access to one, you can also use a hand planer, which is what I did. This is much more tedious and time consuming. You've got to just take off a little bit at a time, constantly using a level to see where the high and low spots are, using a lot of passes with the planer until everything's evened out flat. I filled in any little gaps or holes with wood filler, and then after letting that dry, I started sanding everything down. After going over everything with 150 grit, I then switched sanding pads and gave it a final pass with 220 grit. I wiped everything down with a coat of mineral spirits just to clean off any remaining dust on the wood. You can see from just this one pass how dirty the cloth is. After letting that dry, I gave every shelf a coat of wood conditioner, which goes on before your stain and helps even out the color and prevent blotches. I chose to go with this premium dark walnut wood stain. I like to give everything a heavy coat to begin with, letting it soak into the wood for a couple of minutes before wiping off all the excess. It's important to wipe it off before it's fully dried, or it won't look correct. After 2 coats of the wood stain, I used this water-based polyurethane to give everything a protective finishing coat. I gave everything a very light sanding with 600 grit sandpaper between each coat, and after 3 or 4 coats, I gave the whole thing a final cleaning with one more wipe down with mineral spirits. With all the shelving complete, it was time to move on to building the frame, and I first had to start out by replacing my saw blade with one that's made to cut metal. I don't normally work with metal like this, and it took me a few tries to get things figured out, and I ended up putting a cardboard piece behind the saw to help contain all these sparks. I'm sure there are better ways to do this, and this was definitely not a clean cut, but it was good enough for me and I was able to clean up the end with my angle grinder. Luckily, I was able to order most of these pieces pre-cut from metal supermarkets, and the main task was just to clean up the exterior so it'd be a good welding surface. I measured out where I wanted the bottom rung to go, checking for square, and then welding it into place. This was actually my first time ever welding anything, and I was using a super cheap welder, so all these welds started off looking pretty bad, but they did all hold together, so I was happy with that. I then measured out where I wanted the next rung to go, again cleaning off the section of metal to be welded, attaching it with my magnetic clamps, and then welding it into place. I found that it was easiest to do a couple tack welds, which are basically just little beads, on both sides so that the bar was held in place before doing the final welds along all 4 edges. I then attached the other long piece to this latter section, welding all the pieces to both ends. I cut the bottom rung at 45 degrees at both ends so that I could utilize a miter joint. You can see that once this is attached, it's going to create a good look and a strong base. I welded out the perimeter of the second half of this bookshelf, and then used a couple of cross braces to connect these two pieces together. I wanted to get this thing standing upright, so that as I began welding the bars on the left side of the bookshelf, I could make sure that they were level with the bars on the right. Besides that, the welding process was the same. I utilized tack welds on both edges, and once I confirmed that everything was level, I gave it a full weld. Even though I was new to this, I started to get the hang of things, and I got into a groove, and I was able to complete the second half much faster than the first half. It's extremely important to have a good mask to protect your eyes, and here you'll see just how bright the welds can be. I also realized that I messed up one of my original welds, and you can see here that it's not at 90 degrees. It's not a huge deal though. I ended up using the cut blade on my angle grinder to cut through the welds that I had made, and then I used a hammer to smack the bar into place until it was level, and then re-welded it correctly. This is what the bookshelf frame looked like once I was completed with all the welding. The whole thing's over 8 feet tall. There are 7 rungs on each end and 2 cross braces connecting the two halves. The next step is key for cleaning up the welds, especially if you're a novice welder like me and they don't look very good on their own. Using an angle grinder with a flap disc attachment, you can basically just sand down the welds until they're flat, almost making it look like it's just one solid piece of metal. This really works surprisingly well, and once everything's painted, you're hardly going to even be able to tell that there are weld marks everywhere. I then went through and gave everything a quick pass, just cleaning up the metal so it's ready for paint, getting rid of all the dirt and grime that comes from the factory. I then turned to the help of this JB Weld metal compound, which you probably won't need to use if you're a seasoned welder. But if you mix the two parts together, it creates a really hard substance, which I used to fill in the remaining cracks that were present from my welding gaps. I literally just spread it on anywhere there was a gap in the joint, filling it in until it was smooth. I'm not really relying on this for structural strength, it's just for aesthetic purposes. It takes a day to cure, but then it's super hard, and you can grind it off just like regular metal. After doing this, all the joints really did look seamless. Next, I gave the whole frame a coat of this primer made specifically for metal. This will help the paint go on much easier and adhere much better. I followed that up with a couple coats of this satin black Rust-Oleum spray paint. Black's always a great choice for bookshelf frames because it'll go with any wood color. I also made sure to flip it over after giving it one coat, then spraying from a different angle to make sure I didn't miss any areas. With the frame complete, I went back and added some magnets to the underside of the shelves. I measured out where they'd be resting on the bars and drilled just enough so that these magnets would sit flush against the surface, and then drilled them into place. You could definitely go without these, but I think that these strong magnets really help keep the shelves in place and they don't slide around at all. You can see here where I lined it up so that they're sitting right on top of the frame. This frame barely made it up my stairs, but it made things a lot easier that the shelves are removable. All I needed to do was slide them all back into place. Lastly, I added this anti-tip device. I screwed one end into the stud in the wall and the other end into the top shelf. With a bookshelf this tall, it's really important to have this so that it doesn't tip over and hurt somebody. And with that, the bookshelf was complete. This was a really fun project and a great way to learn how to weld. It also fits perfectly because it was custom built for this space. We filled it up with all our books and decorations and are really happy with the way that it turned out. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.